Let's go with Wyatt. What's point of view again? All right, so it's the perspective from which a story is told. Very good. A perspective from which story is told. Thanks for answering that, and thanks for answering that, Joe. All right, this is what I want you to write down, okay? Write point of view on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, write the perspective from which a story is told. I want us to review this. I know it's been a couple months since we've gone over it, but write point of view on the left, and on the right, you're going to write the perspective from which a story is told. All right, just to make sure that we all have it down, that you guys are remembering this. This is what I want you to do, guys. I know it's Monday, but I want you to keep this rolling, okay? On the count of 3, you're going to tell me again the perspective from which a story is told, okay? So on the count of 3, you're going to say with me again, the perspective from which a story is told. So 1, 2, 3. The perspective from which a story is told. Very good. Very good. I want you guys to know this, all right? This is going to be something important to know, all right? After you write the definition, let's write down the objectives for today. The objectives for today are very simple. So write the objectives on the left-hand side, write the 3 different objectives on the right. So write objectives on the left-hand side, write the 3 objectives on the right. First, you're going to be able to define first, second, and third person perspective. All right? By the end of this class, you should know what each of those 3 are. Okay? You're going to define first, second, and third person perspective. So write that on the right-hand side. The other thing you're going to need to be able to do is identify perspective within text. All right? Which means that I'm going to give you a story. You're going to tell me what perspective is the story being written in. All right? That's really important to me. The final thing I need you to write down, the final objective that you need to write down on the right-hand side, is you have to tell me how perspective affects the story. And I'm going to make sure that you guys know it. So the first one is to define first, second, and third person perspective. Second one is to identify perspective within text. And the third one is explain how perspective affects the story. Now, if we can do this, if you can master each of these 3 objectives, then we'll be a step closer to our big goal. All right? And our big goal is ultimately what we're trying to get in this class. We want you guys to be ready for high school. All right? So can anyone tell me what is one part of the 2 parts of the big goal? So what is one part of the big goal? All right, I see a couple hands raised. I know you guys are writing, but what is the big goal? All right, Raquel, what's one part of the big goal? Very good. Scoring 80% or higher in all standard tests. All right, we're looking at the tests to mark the standards. We want to make sure you master them. Why? What's the other part?
2 years.
Very good. The other one is saying our Gates McGinnity scores, which we have in the back of the room. That you guys are going to get 80%, or I'm sorry, 2 years growth on those reading books. David? What is that? Yes, you may blow your nose. Thank you for asking. All right. Make sure that you guys are getting that down. All right. You guys copy the objectives down. Here's what I want you to do next, okay? After you copy the objectives, we're going to go through and watch a little video clip of the different types of perspective, right? You want to make sure that you have different types of perspective down. Why don't I actually write these objectives into the PowerPoint itself so it's easier for you. All right? So, the objectives for today, I'm going to write down. Make sure you're listening. So, the objectives. All right, so those people that are still writing it down, I'm going to write it for you right up here so you can just copy it down from here. Students will be able to define first, second, and third person perspective. Students will be able to identify what perspective is in the text. And then finally, students will be able to, can somebody read me the third one? How perspective affects the story. Very good. Make sure you're focusing, guys. All right, you guys are doing a great job so far. So what we're going to do is watch this video clip on point of view, and you're going to fill in the notes as we go through it.
Narrative perspective. This presentation is about the author's point of view. In this presentation, you will learn how to identify the perspective of the narrator in a story. This presentation is brought to you by eReadingWorksheets.com. dialogue and narration.
So
To
right
be
down
able
the
to
left-hand
accurately
side.
identify the narrator's perspective, you need to understand the difference between dialogue and narration. Dialogue is when characters speak. Narration is when the narrator speaks. Quotation marks separate narration from dialogue. Like in the following example. Help, my cousin Jack said. In this example,
All right, so this guy goes a little fast, so I'm going to be breaking it up a little bit. In terms of this, put dialogue and narration on the left-hand side. Again, dialogue is when characters speak. So when someone's actually saying something you can put into quotes, that's dialogue. All right, so when we do sub-search, and I tell you to take out a quote from the text, that's dialogue. All right, talking. All right, narration is when someone's describing when something's happening. All right, and then you notice that they put the red dialogue, they put dialogue in red and narration in gray. All right, so there's two different things that usually happen in every story. Usually somebody's describing what's going on, and usually there's some kind of conversation. All right, so the example, help, my cousin Jack said. Help is what's the actual dialogue, the gray is the narration. Okay, that's what you need to write down on the right-hand side. Matthew?
Yeah, we have to write that quotation marks.
Yes, please write the quotation marks example so that way you guys know it. All right. It's important to know it so that way you guys can identify what's dialogue and what's narration. So write it into your loose leaf sheet of paper. Don't worry about the worksheet yet. The worksheet's going to be for the PowerPoint. So again, copy this down into your loose leaf. And an example as well. I want you guys to know it. So help is the dialogue. This gray is the narration. You guys are doing a great job, by the way. Okay? So make sure to have done. What's wrong? Usually you put the examples on the right-hand side, right? The Cornell notes, the title, the main idea goes on the left, details go on the right. Okay. I'll give you a little bit more time, then I want to move on. David, last warning, then I'm going to ask you to move, okay? Focus on this.
this example, there are two voices. First is the voice of my cousin Jack. This is indicated by quotation marks, which show us when characters are speaking. Quotation marks go around dialogue, or the voices of the characters. My cousin Jack said is the voice of the narrator. The narrator is telling us who is speaking. Notice there are no quotation marks around the narrator's voice. Identifying narrative perspective. The narrator's perspective
All right,
is about the
same thing you did
narrator,
before,
that
but
is to
this
say,
one.
the person who is telling the story. Therefore, we're not concerned with looking at the dialogue or the voices of the characters inside of quotation marks. We're not interested in what characters are saying, at least not for the purpose of identifying the narrator's perspective. Only the narrator's voice matters. Pronoun case. We are trying to figure out the narrator's
I'll go back to
point
it.
of the story. We are assisted in this by paying attention to the case of the pronouns and what characters are saying. Case. We are trying
One more. And here we go.
the narrator's voice matter.
So what I would like you to do is copy down on the left-hand side the title, and remember the details go on the right. So, identifying narrative perspective. Basically, all we're trying to do is tell you who's the one telling the story. Okay. The narrator. And in this case, we want to know who the narrator is. The best way you can do that is by looking at what dialogue is being used, what is the narrator saying. Only the narrator's voice matters. Okay, they're the person that's telling you the story. So in Harry Potter, we focus on Harry Potter, right? He's the one person that we see the perspective. The narrator is following Harry around. You're seeing the world through his eyes. All right? In the Hunger Games, the narrator's focused on Katniss, right? Katniss is the main character. You're looking at her story, her life. You're following her as she goes through it all. Okay? In a biography, who would usually be the narrator in a biography? Who's the narrator in a biography? Say, for instance, let's use a biography we've read. Martin Luther King. All right? Who's the narrator in Martin Luther King Jr.'s biography? Martin Luther King. Because he wrote part of his autobiography before he was dead. Very good. Okay? So in this, you're always trying to find the narrator. And we're going to discuss why that's important. Okay? You guys are going to know why it affects the story. All right? And how it affects the story. Okay? You guys are doing a great job. Make sure to finish up with the notes, and we'll move on to the next one. So make sure that you're finishing up the notes, so we'll move on to the next one. You guys are doing a great job, so make sure you're focused on this. Get this through. All right. Okay, at this point I'm going too fast, just let me know. I want to make sure that you guys are focused on this. All right? The goal will be, when we get to the point where we're actually reading the poems and we're reading the text, you got to tell me what perspective it's in, and then how does it affect the story. Okay? So you're going to have to tell me who's the narrator, and then you have to tell me how the narrator's view is affecting the story. So it's important to know. Okay? So let's go on to the next one.
Voice matters. Pronoun case. We are trying to figure out the narrator's viewpoint on the story. We are assisted in this by paying attention